Welcome back to class. I want to continue our discussion on micro-programming marathons and series, dealing with today mission trips. And as we look at mission trips, there's some key things that I want us to consider as we look through those things. But honestly, I want you to take a minute and just think about the most exciting mission trip that you've ever been on. What did it look like? What was your experience and your takeaway? How did God use it in your life? You know, with mission trips, a lot of times we focus on the field and what we can do on the field, but we really need to understand that there's a complete package of impact that comes from using mission trips in the lives of teenagers as well as in the life of our church across the board. And that's where we want to start here when we talk about marathons. We look at the goals. Why do we need to have mission trips? And it has an impact in three specific different areas that you can see there in your work text. First off, it has an impact on the lives of teenagers. When we think about having a mission trip, some of the goals that we need to have in mind would be the goals that we want teenagers to broaden their burden and to gain a greater world perspective around them, to get them out of their bubble and to see beyond themselves, beyond their desire to be popular, but beyond their desire to make a sports team or to have a certain cell phone or to wear clothes a certain way or to hang out with friends at the movies on the weekend, but to see beyond themselves and see the world that's around them. Not necessarily just the world that's in need, but just to see that there's a greater picture of existence here on this planet than what goes on in their world, in their town, in their city, in their community, and in their own home and in their bedroom. That the world is a very big place, and God cares about everyone on this planet. Obviously, when you start doing missions, you start seeing the needs beyond ourselves, and how we all have a different set of expectations depending on where we live on the planet. But you really want to be able to see students gain a greater, broader world perspective, and for their burden to be for people in other cultures that don't know Christ. Second, you want them to see their potential for ministry. We sell teenagers short on a regular basis in the local church. We want them to see their potential for ministry and maybe even consider ministry possibilities as a vocation and see how God may use their experience on the mission field. And don't be too traditional or to pigeonhole their expectations or the way that may look. God may be calling some of them who have been intending to be engineers or go into the fields of medicine or to teach, may call them to still continue in those preparations, but then to also prepare to do that internationally. So we really want God to take who they are and be able to see how he can use their experience doing missions and participating in short-term missions to broaden their ministry potential across the planet and use what God is training them for and equipping them for and how he's designed them in an international context for the sake of the gospel. Third, to build their faith. There is a great opportunity when you invite students to begin to participate in acquiring the resources needed to go on an international mission trip. I remember when I was in high school, the last mission trip I participated in with my student ministry that I grew up in, we were raising money, and it wasn't a very expensive trip. Of course, in 1987, $280 was a little bit more than felt like more like $500 or $600 maybe you would today, and I didn't have it. And God had used a lot of things in my life to confirm that he wanted me to be on that trip that last year before I went off to college to train for youth ministry in the local church. And I had an anonymous donor that called in. My youth pastor called my mother and said, just let Troy know that his mission trip expenses have been covered by an anonymous donor who just wanted to be a blessing but did not want to be named. And it was a great, incredible time of faith building for me and seeing God provide where God guides. And it's an awesome opportunity to do that in the lives of your students. Number 4, the other goal for your teenagers is it confirms their consecration. What does the word consecration deal with? We talk about that in the intro course. Consecration is the aspect of being set apart and being a living sacrifice, a Romans 12:1 kind of Christian, a living sacrifice to God, and separating yourself for his service. And so we want them to be able to confirm that in this type of program, international missions. So our first set of goals is for the teenagers, for our students. The second set is for the church. It broadens their world perspective. You allow the church to be a part of sending students to the mission field, even for a short-term mission project. Second, it helps build their faith, much like it does the teenagers. And then third, it lets them become a biblical sending body. It's what we're called to do. You must have a pastoral and church support in a project this big when you involve international missions. So there are goals for teenagers, there's goals for the church, and now there's also goals for the field, the mission field. Two specific things. One is evangelistic, it's for the sake of the gospel, and two, to assist and encourage the missionary. We want to encourage the body of Christ, build up the body of Christ and the missionaries that we work with alongside on the field, and we want to carry out the mission of the gospel evangelistically. So there are the goals. Now, what about administration? You guys have been working on that. I know the deadline has already come and gone for this particular aspect of the trip. You're looking at some different aspects. One could be self-planned, and in the self-plan, sometimes there is less costs involved. There's more flexibility with goals and your philosophy, what you're trying to accomplish. You can customize for your kids. And there's more flexibility in schedule and the nature of the project. You can also go with an agency, and I recommend that, especially for your first time out, that you consider using an agency. There are some major advantages, I think, that outweigh the disadvantages, unless your church has a very well-developed missions department there who has built the contacts internationally to help that trip run smoothly. But when you use an agency, you pick up more expense. A lot of times they'll charge more, and you're not just charging more for just frivolous things. They have a staff that makes sure that your trip is planned well. They also have you're paying for their experience as well as the contacts that they have built relationships with over the years that help your trip run smoothly. Third is that, or second, they have better channels and contacts in the country to help you establish the ministry, and it frees you really to concentrate on ministry with your students, which is the beautiful thing about working with an agency. And then finally, like I said before, you think about using an agency if it's your first mission trip internationally. The IMB has a great program where you can do that. World Changers is a great option that I would highly recommend if you're doing an international mission trip. Next, we look at the field location. How do you decide where you need to go? And that's a big question. My first, I'm going to give you 6 things here, but before I give you the 6 things, the first place I would go is in your church. Where is your church already active on the planet, and how can you involve students in one of those projects? But here are 6 questions to ask. You got to look at the cost, look at the distance, contacts you may have in different parts of the world, and the types of projects that you may be able to be a part of if you go to that particular country. So those are all things that really should begin to help you decide where you're going to take your students. Now, distance is a major issue, obviously, because for most international mission trips, you're going to be flying to those locations, and so that'll affect cost. Second is you want to look at language barriers. With the language barriers, I mean, it may not be an issue to go to a Spanish-speaking country. You may be able to find interpreters. If you go to other countries, Asian countries, sometimes it can be more difficult. You may choose, if you end up in the country of Africa, you may not have as big an issue because the language barrier may not be as high. Because many speak English, so you need to think about the language barriers. Third, think about an inner city ministry for maybe your first trip. It's definitely a cross-cultural experience for many suburban kids, and it's a great partnership with the inner city and urban ministries. Think about close regions when you go international. Canada, by the way, is an international mission trip. Mexico, Jamaica, or one of the islands could be good options for that. Then you really consider open fields. I mean, Saudi Arabia is probably not going to be an open field. Brazil would be an open field, so that you need to consider them as well. And then with middle school, you need to think about shorter trips and safer trips. I'm not talking about sheltering them completely, but you need to think about that in respect to their age and their maturity with that trip. What about the time? How long should it be? Programming, all these things come into play. First, you got to look at the parent's calendar. When should you have the trip? When are your families most open to the trip? You'll probably have several options that you can choose from. You don't want to program a mission trip during your typical vacation time for families in your church. You need to look at your program calendar. Where does it fit best on your program calendar? I've had youth pastors in the past who have planned their mission trip for certain age groups specifically high school, they plan it during spring break. And that has worked really well and for them. Sometimes that may work better than doing the summer. In the summertime, you may find 2 or 3 weeks for a mission trip. Do a 10 to 13-day mission trip. Or you may do spring break and do 10 days or 7 days. Look at the field situation. Here's a consideration. Sometimes when you think about going to Mexico, you run into the issue of what is happening with the climate in that country during that time. So not only the field situation when it comes to the work and the ministry you'll be able to do, but also thinking about the climate and the situation in the country, what lays out best. So you need to consider those things. Well, what kind of project do you need to do? The next page, the next section deals with the actual project, and there really are 2 categories for the kinds of projects. One is manual service and one is direct ministry. With manual service, we're looking specifically at doing facility repairs, cleaning, maybe some light construction, sometimes some heavier construction, depending on the country that you're in and maybe the agency that you're working with, if you're working with an agency. Then there's the option for direct ministry, where you do things such as concerts, where you do church ministry and church work and help churches that are starting up or helping them reach out in their community, doing street evangelism or surveys or community park programs and things of that nature, as well as doing stuff within the churches, maybe with the youth ministry or children's ministry, running a VBS with a couple of local churches in that country. Those are some different options. One's manual service, and sometimes you can combine the two, and you can get some overlap where you can have a crew that's doing some work in the community and then another team that's doing ministry at a local church. Well, as we come towards the end of this, we're going to look at the budget and the income, and then we'll look at team selection. With the budget, there's some things to consider. Depending on where you're going, $1,500 can be a good range, but it really just depends on the church that you're in. Some of you work in churches, and that is not really an option to think about doing $1,500. So you need to find out what is a comfortable area for the budget. And remember, part of this process is building the faith of those who are involved, both the church and the families of those teenagers, including the teenagers. But $1,500 can be a good range, especially if airfare is involved. You need to cover your expenses with your fees for the mission trip, as well as lay staff getting a discount. And then cover any missionaries' expenses when you're on the field. So if you have activities or you have places you're going transportation-wise, make sure you build into your budget the necessary funds to cover their gas. Now, if you're working with an agency, the agency should have allowed for that in their budget. Then income, where does it come from? Well, you're going to come from scholarships, sponsors. You can do fundraisers. You may have built into your budget a stipend or an offset amount for that. Your church mission budget may also help offset some of that. The church that I worked in before I moved to Louisville and came here to teach at Southern, we had a budgeted amount in our missions budget that was designated for the student ministry mission trip. And so it was a very generous amount, and it helped greatly defray the cost. But although that you don't want to completely, defray the cost to where the students don't have to contribute anything. Now, if students do fundraisers or participate in other programs and sponsorships and serving in different ways in the church, and their whole trip is covered, then that's great because they've earned it. They've worked hard to sacrifice their time to be able to provide for the cost of that trip. But you don't want a scholarship mission trips to where there's no cost involved or no labor involved with the students. Then team selection. This is very simple. You got 3 different areas: parents, staff, and teenagers. With the parents specifically, you're going to be looking at keeping them informed with the details. And this is where you don't necessarily over-communicate all the details of every little thing that's going to happen on the mission trip, but you want to keep parents informed with the details of the process of getting there and as much information as needed about what will happen when you get there. Be very sensitive to their concerns. You will have parents who are very concerned about things that you may see as being inconsequential or very minor, or maybe they're being overprotective. Be sensitive to your parents' concerns. You win their trust in the first or second trip that you take their students on, and it will go a long way to create the DNA in the environment of parents and families in your church to trust the student ministry when their teens are involved. And you may be able to help lay out the groundwork for doing family mission trips together. So be careful about concerns that parents raise and how you give it the appropriate attention. The staff. Lay workers in your program are the perfect ones to be a part of this. This is still part of the student ministry program, and they should be a part of this. You need to provide discount if possible, and then give specific job descriptions for each one of them. I would also encourage you to give specific job descriptions to teenagers, which I say here in just a second. Explain with teenagers, explain the project in details. This involves multiple training sessions. For any type of international mission trip, I would recommend laying out 6 to 8 training sessions that if you're going to do a summer mission trip, you would begin those training sessions usually December or January. So you have plenty of time to lay those out at least once a month, and then even a little bit closer as the time approaches. Have applications. Go through an interview process with every single teenager. It's not just a come one, come all, and if you pay the deposit, you get to go. You need to have the right people on this trip. If you remember our pyramid that we talked about earlier in the notes in the work text, we talked about those programming pyramid, and even in your project, you had to identify what level it was, 1, 2, 3, or 4. This would be a level 4 program. This would be reserved for those students who are involved and concerned and mature to where they have a compassion for the lost. They crave the word, and they are looking for opportunities and ready to serve in areas of ministry that require a high level expectation as far as leadership goes and maturity. Cover that in the interview. Provide them a job description. Don't have teenagers. Any teenager on that trip should have a designated responsibility for the whole trip. It may be luggage, getting to and from the airports when you leave. Others, it may be taking care of the meals. They have certain days in certain locations when they're the ones who are overseeing the setup and the cleanup. You may have those who are in charge of worship. You may give every teenager must have a job description, and then you must, as I said before, offer extensive training sessions for the mission trip. I hope this was helpful just to talk through some of the notes on micro-programming mission trips, and your project is going well. Most of you have turned in your stuff, but I encourage you to keep at it. This is a very tedious project, but it's a very beneficial one, I hope, as it has been in the past for most of our students. So we will see you next time, or talk to you next time on the as we move forward and look at programming the series and curriculum in large and small group meetings.